So we're going to be talking about the importance of dealing assertively with abusive people. And we have to use the word very carefully. Abusive is not someone that you have in conflict with or someone you don't like. It's someone who is hurting you, wanting to hurt you. It's a deliberate act of hurt, where they call you names or deprive you of money or rape you or do things that are hurtful. But if somebody is argumentative or somebody, doesn't have a filter and will tell you if you don't look nice, it's not abuse. And we need to, who was I listening to the other day was talking about the need to toughen up a bit. And they were saying how hard it is for comedians. In the old days, comedians would tell jokes and, mock different people. And it was an ability to laugh at yourself and those kind of things. And yet now everything is not politically correct. And often you'll see a thing on the TV and it'll go, if you're sensitive, call Lifeline, and it may have some disturbing images, and some of the images are really not disturbing, or we wouldn't have thought of them as particularly disturbing. So we've got this very fragile world now where you can't talk or do or whatever. But really a lot of it isn't abuse, and we need to be sensitive to, is this really abuse, or do I just need to learn to cope with it better? In the old days, we used to have an expression, be like Teflon. Just let it wipe off you, We've got to find a way to deal, because not everyone is going to say exactly what you want to say. You might have a mother-in-law who says, oh, I see you put on weight. Okay, it's not so nice. Is it abuse? Probably not. And sometimes she means well. Doesn't mean it's okay, but it's not abuse. Unfortunately, the word is used all the time. And now that, there's another famous word is coercive control. And I see a lot of couples where, the wife will say it's coercive control, and I'm listening and I'm really trying to be unbiased, and I'm not hearing it as coercive control. It might be somebody who likes to be in charge, he's a bit anxious and say likes things his way, but he's not OCD and it's not coercive control, and they have a bit of friction about it. But these words are bandied about, and then you become anxious or upset because you believe you're in the situation. So we're talking about, if someone is truly abusive, you need to deal with them assertively. You're not meant to, the Torah way isn't to be a doormat, and the Torah way isn't to allow people to treat you badly. So it says in Mishlei, which is Proverbs, do not answer a fool according to his folly, lest you become like him. So in other words, if someone is picking a fight or saying stupid things, we always say don't sink to their level. Don't get engaged in the discussion or the argument. If someone is being foolish, or, often with people who are borderline, if they say something to you and you try and defend yourself, whatever you defend yourself back, they use against you. So the more information you give them, the more it's used against you. So we teach people who live with a borderline person, or they have a borderline mother or something, that if something is said, you just give monosyllables back. Yes, no, thank you. The minute you go, well, the reason I'm late is because, then they launch onto that, and then it becomes worse and worse. So if you know that that's what that person is like, don't get involved, don't get engaged. Find a way not to engage. It also says in Mishlei, do not reprove a scorner. I always remind everyone this is old-fashioned language from the 1980s. Lest he hate you. Reprove a wise man and he will love you. So this is what we're saying. If somebody's going to listen to you, then you can reprove them. You can give them constructive criticism. But if you know that this person is going to mock you or degrade you, or it's going to make a major conflict, then don't. You're wasting your time. So if you want to discipline or tell something to somebody, if you think they're wise and you can sit down and explain to them your point of view, then absolutely go for it. But if they're what they're calling a scorner, someone who's going to mock you and deride you and be abusive to you, then don't. It's just not worth it. It says in Strive for Truth, there's an outstanding and elevated type of individual whose devotion to Hashem is so strong that it leads him to try and avoid the company of the wicked altogether. So there's a lot written about this. The Rambam also writes about it. Choose your neighbors carefully. Choose your friends carefully. There's one, it's something like, if you know there's a tzaddik in the town, become a friend, sit at the foot of the tzaddik. In other words, be around them, learn from them. And this is a big thing, choosing your friends well. If you are around people who, what they're calling are wicked, people who are abusive to other people, cruel to other people, swindlers, whatever, don't mix with them, because they will influence you, and you will, if you go to bed with dogs, you wake up with fleas. So very important that you choose your friends and you choose your lifestyle, because it's not just you're in a moment, and Torah is very much a lifestyle, how you live, the people you mix with, the actions you take. And when you're with like-minded people, it helps you to do the right thing. When you're not, you can be influenced, or you can be very hurt. It's a bit like you see kids at school who all they want to do is be in the cool group, and they keep getting teased and bullied, but they just want to keep being there to their detriment. And often we do that as well. We want to be in a group that we don't really fit into, and it's harmful to yourself. So sometimes one has to be realistic. Where do I fit in? And it's okay, we all fit in somewhere, and we all have our unique place, and we can't all be everything all the time. We have our place and the people that are good and supportive for us. So of course there are many intolerant, unrefined and cruel people. However, it does not help you or them to be in temper over this fact. So remember, we say in temper, we don't only mean being angry, we mean having a temperamental response. So in temper could mean being overreacting or withdrawing or having a panic attack. It's a temperamental response as opposed to a more calm response. You should do everything in your power to bring them closer to Torah and mitzvahs. At the same time, recognize that you may be adversely affected by the frustration of talking to people who are resistant to all your efforts and who resent your interference. So from a Jewish point of view, even if someone is wicked, you should always try and bring them closer with kindness. But you have to be realistic about that's what you're doing. So we're talking about Chabad earlier. It's often in these places, they have people walking into their Chabad houses in all places of the world that are not always the best people. They're travelers, some of them are swindlers, they can be gamblers, whatever, and everyone will be welcomed, but it doesn't mean the shaliach becomes their best friend. They will be very loving and warm and accept everybody, but there's a distance at which you try and bring them closer, but not to your own detriment. You can view such people as a supreme test of your midas, not to return an insult with an insult. It's actually a mitzvah. Someone insults you, not to respond. To have compassion and to be diligent in trying to help others. So you have this difficult person in your life, and you can still work on your values of bringing them closer to Torah, or as we're saying, not engaging with them or having compassion for where they're at. It becomes about your growth, not about fixing them. At times you will need the courage to disengage from them, either emotionally or physically. And that can be very, very hard. Often it's a close family member, but often we're people pleasers, and so we don't want to disengage, or we feel bad if we do that. But sometimes the only thing to do is to disengage. At other times you need the patience and determination to withstand their negativity in order to awaken a spark of goodness within them. And I'm thinking of an example where I have a few clients actually where they're all boys actually. I have three I can think of. They have teenage boys who are really abusive and mean, but they're their children. And this would be an example where this would apply. You don't want to disengage from your son. You don't want to kick him out the house. And so you work very hard on inspiring them, bringing them closer, having compassion, wanting to awaken. Everyone has a spark of goodness. So with children in particular, sometimes you have children that are very difficult. And these cases, I'm thinking about all of them. One of them knocked his mother down the stairs and she had a broken shoulder. Another one also wants to beat up his mother and they have to call the police. It's not so uncommon anymore. And so and the third one also hit the father. And so there's quite a bit of violence all with the siblings. And it's difficult. It's your kids and you have to learn to live with them. So in these cases, and I'm mentioning this because many other times, the best thing is just to leave. You don't have to live with an abusive spouse to try and awaken their goodness in them. You just leave. and other family members, sometimes you actually just have to disengage. But if it's a child or someone that's really important to you, like often a mother, you need to find a way that you can manage them, because it's a big decision to cut them out completely. You don't have to have a close relationship, but you do have a mitzvah of honoring a mother. It doesn't, so it's not an easy one, but the first step is this actually abuse, or is this just a difficult person who's argumentative? Are they trying to hurt me, or are they just stupid, and say stupid things? Those kind of things, to really, you don't have to put up with anything, but as I say, not to over-exaggerate, and then think about how valuable is this relationship to me, and how far do I need to go at managing it, or do I need to disengage? And both are options. You don't have to put up with anything. And in fact, I heard Miriam Adahan, funny enough, actually many years ago say, sometimes you have to send those kids away. Sometimes you have to send them to boarding school or something, because you cannot actually live with them. And that's also okay. If it's a good place and they hopefully will come out better, that's also okay. So in Duties of the Heart, he says, it is irrationality and poverty of spirit to patiently endure injuries which might be averted. This sort of humility is found among foolish and ignorant people, and is not really humility, but rather spiritual poverty and blindness. So that's why when people have this idea that women, from women are abused and can't do anything, or we have to put up with, Jews have to put up with everything, you see from Duties of the Heart the opposite. He actually says it's a poverty of spirit to patiently endure injuries. It's not humility, it's spiritual poverty. And that's where today, having a state of Israel, we don't have to endure. We can stand up for ourselves. We don't need other people's permission to defend ourselves. It's an over-humility when people go, we'll just roll over and this is our lot in life. That is not a Jew. When we accept Hashem's will, it doesn't mean it's our lot in life and we can just be treated badly. So humility, you have self-esteem when you know who you are, but you know like Moshe, he knew he was great, but only because Hashem made him great. He never took credit for it, but he knew he was the leader. He wasn't like a timid little leader. He stood up. This week was Korach, and he challenged Korach, and he did what he had to do. He knew he was the leader of all these people. But when you knew him, he took not one iota of credit for it. He knew that he was a conduit, and every ability he had came from Hashem. That's humility. When someone goes, I'm a nothing, and people can treat me, look how humble I am, it doesn't matter what people do, that is poverty of spirit. It's not the Jewish way. And that's one of the things I believe now, since we've had the state of Israel, but there were pockets of people always that did this. It's an unfair thing to say that everybody, always through Jewish history, there were strong Jews, Hanukkah, and even all the years, the Barbanel, the Spanish Inquisition, there were always very strong Jews who fought back. We don't, we humble because this is our duty. If you think about what everybody's saying now, you have to be religious to say it. You can feel this is a spiritual job that we're doing. And we actually feel good about it in the sense that we know what we have to do. But it's not our job. We're doing it, when people are saying we're fighting evil, we're actually God's representatives, really. It's not doing it for our own pleasure by any means. But if we were just to roll over, that's spiritual poverty. So not to feel I have to put up with this. You don't. And it's very important that there's enough sense of self that goes, it's not okay. You can't keep doing this to me. When dealing with abusive people, remember that passivity often makes them more aggressive and contemptuous of you. Those people respect power, and you'll have to use it to manage them while avoiding the sin of vengeance. So the idea is you set boundaries. That's the language you'd use today. You can very firmly set boundaries, and they respect you more because when you have boundaries than when you just keep engaging and giving in. But at the same time, you're not allowed to take revenge. It's a sin to take revenge. So if someone does something, you can put up boundaries, but you can't do it back to them. And she says here, EMETT in no way encourages people to unnecessarily tolerate or condone abuse. Okay. So very important, we are not doormats. We need to know who we are. We need to stand up for who we are. Don't be a pushover. Walk proudly as a Jew. You have a godly mission. Everything you have, every asset you have is given to you by Hashem, but use it and be proud of it in the sense that this is who I am. I'm clever, or I'm rich, or I'm beautiful, or I have this family, or I'm good at engineering, or whatever you're telling, because Hashem gave that to me. But I am good at it, and I can use it. Okay, so we're moving on to chapter 7. Foster healthy relationships with communication techniques. So we used to always say communication's everything. Good communication is everything. So it says in Kuntras Abbas Israel, he who loves a fellow Jew loves God, for he contains within himself a part of God above. Love for him, for his inward self is love of God. So this idea that you need to love a fellow Jew, it's not the external. It's the fact that you both have a piece of God within you, exactly the same. And when you understand that you're both the same, even though you have different tools, right? As I said, beauty, intelligence, money, whatever the tools you have, but inside we're all exactly the same. And that's what you love, is the godliness in that person. And if you don't see it, to work on seeing it. To work on seeing that that person also has a mission and is as godly as you are. So it gives you a basic respect. Regesh, feeling, is composed of the same letters as Gesher, bridge. It is through our feelings that we truly connect to each other. So where was I hearing this the other day? Oh, it's a book. I can't remember what it's called. I know what it's called. I can't remember the author for a minute. So she's a beautiful young girl, and it's called What Would You Do If You Weren't Afraid? And she's famous because she was very involved high up in Facebook, and then she was very involved in TikTok. One of these Jewish dynamite young ladies, Michal, somebody, it'll come to me, Michal. And she grew up in a secular home, and she always felt anxious. And then at some point, I think she was in California, at some point she got involved with Chabad, and she's become Orthodox, but she uses, and she's written it for corporate people and for non-Jews, but she uses a lot of Jewish ideas about what would you do if you weren't afraid. And then these are things that help you not be afraid. All the things we talk about here, how not to be afraid. And she's got a whole chapter about a narrow bridge. So it's a famous expression of Reb Nachman of Breslev, who was the great-grandson of the Baal Shem Tov. He has a famous saying that goes, the whole world is a narrow bridge, but the main thing is not to be afraid. So people know it as a song, but it's actually his expression. And the way you look at it is if you were like outdoors and you were in this big ravine, and you've got one of those rope ladders and you're walking across, that's what our life is like. We're on this thin bridge that doesn't feel secure all the time. That's what this world is, between birth and death. We're on this narrow bridge. But the main thing is not to be afraid. And so this is the whole thing, that we need to know that it feels shaky and all the things about don't look down, keep your eye on the goal, keep going. But the whole thing is we're all on this bridge, and the main thing is not to be afraid. So how do we not be afraid? It's by trusting in Hashem, by seeing a bigger picture and so on. But this is a different play on it. The word regesh is the same letters as gesher. And what she's saying is, I just went off topic there, it had nothing to do with this, is you connect to people with feelings. Feelings are a bridge. So when someone's vulnerable and shares something they're going through, you feel connected to them. So that's really important. So we have an obligation to love thy neighbor as thyself. It does not say to love only those who are intelligent, polite, and kind, but rather to love all of those with whom you're in contact. And if we do not feel loving, then at least, the very least, we must act in a loving manner. So it's a mitzvah to love everybody. You can't pick and choose. It's very easy to love your friends and to entertain your friends. It's not so easy to love someone who rubs you up the wrong way, but the mitzvah is to love them. And as she says, if you can't actually love them, act in a loving way, wear the mask. And what does it mean? It means to look out for them, to be respectful, to be civil. It doesn't mean you have to be affectionate, but it means that you love their essence and you realize they're worthy of your time and your respect. One way we create loving relationships is by sharing our likes and dislikes, our feelings and worries, our hopes and dreams with each other. Sharing builds trust. Mutual sharing implies that you care enough to try and understand the other person's personality and his way of looking at life. So you take the time to give people time. And I was actually reading Jonathan Sacks the other night. He was talking about how often you can't solve people's problems, but you can always listen. And he was saying when you say the Shema, you cover your eyes, because the Jewish way is listening. It's a much higher level when you're listening, because you can, with sight, you can take in these visions and you can be distracted by all kinds of colors and things. But it's more introspective to listen. It actually literally goes, it's not the same thing. And when we say the Shema, listen, hear, O Israel, we're also connecting to Hashem. So just listen. He says, just listen to people. Just give them 10 minutes of your time. You don't have to solve it, but you can be respectful. If someone wants to tell you about something, just take 10 minutes, listen to them. Very important. That's a form of loving them, not don't brush them off. Many people mistakenly think that when you love someone, you should avoid mentioning the things that bother you. In reality, the opposite is more often true. If you are hurt by an incident or repeatedly irritated by someone's behavior and you suffer in silence, it can build up a wall of coldness over the years. So this is the answer to the question, we won't use the word confront. You can communicate your feelings to people because it'll make you closer. But if it's going to lead to an explosion, then you don't. So all of these things take thought and patience. You may suddenly mention the behavior tactlessly in the heat of the anger, and you'll cause far greater damage than if you spoke about it calmly and patiently and sought solutions. So the truth is that if you just do it in the heat of anger, it never received. So there's very little that has to be dealt with straight away. And I learned this from Rabbi Leda many years ago. They have this idea that a couple should have a business meeting once a week. And they say things like, you know what irritates you in a marriage? Why did you leave your coffee cup on the table? Why didn't you pick up the laundry? Why didn't you phone your mother? Why? It's not the big things. Now, if you think about it, when you live with someone, you can be doing that all day. Do this, why didn't you do that? Because we're bickering the whole time, pointing out what people didn't do. So his whole thing was, just write it down. And you have the whole list of all the things that you need done, but you're not carping at someone the whole day. Then you have your business meeting, and you both know that's what it's about, and you take out your list, and you say, on Monday at 6 p.m., you left your coffee mug, and in future, can you move it? And you talk about it, and you solve the problem. What often happens, though, is when it comes to reading the list, you think, I don't really need to say that. So get out of the habit of, in anger, like, oh, there you go again, and I'm sick of you doing that. We do it all day long with our family members. So just write it down and rather sit down and communicate it in a way where you're going to aim to solve the problem. And if you're talking about his coffee mug and he's talking about your toothbrush or your hairbrush, it's okay because you're both saying, this irritates me and let's fix it. It's a very different feeling to in the heat of the moment, I'm sick of your hair in the sink, when that doesn't make you feel good. It is also essential to ask for validation of possible rejection if you have an insecure thought about someone's behavior. Your feelings are not always accurate reflections of reality. And one of the tools are feelings aren't facts. So before you jump to conclusions, ask, I have this insecure thought that you're not happy with me because of X. Is that true? When you told me you were busy, I had the suspicion that it wasn't true, that the real reason was that you didn't want me to be around. Was I right? Do you feel I've been making too many demands lately? So rather than going, you're busy and you never make time for me and you don't want me, you just jump to a conclusion. You start off by going, it's my insecure feeling, and let me just check in with you that that's really what's going on. People differ vastly in their desire for an ability to communicate on a deep level. And this for me, when I first learned this years ago, was an eye-opener. Some people have a high need level and other people have a low need level, meaning some people love to talk in depth have deep and meaningful...
Maybe you should get married.
That's right. It's true. And someone has a low level, and the one who has a high level often sees that person who has the low level as aloof and uncaring. But the one who has the low level thinks the other one is demanding and dependent. Right. Don't anger yourself over other people's communication style. Rather be accepting of the reality and then figure out how you can resolve your differences in a mutually respectful way. So I found this a lot with friendships. You can be very judgmental. You want to have a deep and meaningful, and you think that they're superficial. That's a judgment. But you actually understand some people love small talk. They don't really want to talk about their feelings. And other people hate small talk and she talks about it as different needs and takes away the judgment. And we're not all the same. As with most habits, the more you push others to either share more or talk less, the more likely you are to reinforce the very behavior you would like to eliminate. When it comes to basic personality traits, such as communication patterns, it's wise to be very patient and to approach change in a non-demanding way. Respect people's differences, especially those of your own family members. Remember, no two human beings can ever share the exact same reality. What is important to one may not be to another. So that's another thing. You talk about the coffee mug or whatever. To some people, everything's got to be like this. And again, I'm not talking about OCD. And to another person, it isn't a big deal. I remember many years ago in one of my groups, we were talking about, I don't know what the context was, and I was saying at that time I used to entertain a lot, and I was using paper, and I used to buy serviettes in bulk, and Les used to order them, and I used to get pink serviettes, and I didn't really care. Boxes full, and we'd store them. And one of the girls she couldn't get to it. She said, I go and I choose my serviettes. Like, they're a main feature of my table. And to me, I was just so happy I had a box, and if more people came, I opened whatever was on the top of the box. And I always remember that because I could see she couldn't, and to me it was like a waste of time. I appreciate beautiful things, but for me, my lifestyle was a waste of time to go to a shop. In those days, you couldn't buy on Amazon, right? You had to go to a shop, and you had to go into the serviette section, and you had to choose, and you had to have enough. For me, it was a big time waster. And we often joke about it. She just thought I was so, I don't know what word I want to say, but really didn't have good, it was not in that way, but she couldn't get that. To me, it wasn't an issue if it was a black serviette or a pink one. So we're different, and that respecting is what loving your fellow Jew is. I don't have to be like her. She doesn't have to be like me. One person may want only very polite and superficial relations. Others are exactly the opposite extreme. Often there's not a great deal that can be done to alter this trait. If change is possible, it'll come only through patient effort. So when you understand their different personalities, it's not going to change by nagging. It comes through effort. And often, especially when you see this in good marriages, over time you become more like each other. Because when you're kind and understanding and you're listening to each other, over time people can change themselves. But most people do not change when they're yelled at or criticized or told they're wrong or inferior or stupid. People don't thrive. But when there's a willingness, I would like to have more in-depth discussions, or the other person is saying, I would like to have more fun, frivolous discussions. Over time, you can get there. Might never be exactly the same, but you can meet those needs. In really good relationships, you can work towards that. But I want to pick up on what you said, because it's a very famous thing that Virginia Satir in the 70s, she was one of the first marriage therapists. And it was a big thing in the 70s. Before that, there was individual therapy and couple therapy. I think it was like the middle 70s, because family therapy only came out around the beginning of the 80s. We're all used to this now, but in the early days there was analysis, and in the late 60s Rogers came along and was more humanistic, and then couple therapy came along. So Virginia Satir wrote this book, and in those days, I say this now because the belief was that if you got a couple into a room and you just got them to talk and talk and talk, and finally they would understand each other better and you'd solve the problem. Fast forward now 50 years, and you have people like Gottman, who studied thousands of couples, and he himself has been married for over 40 years. He goes, even in the best of marriages, there are some things you will never understand about each other. Never. he doesn't give this example. I've heard Rabbi Moss give this example, maybe because Rabbi Moss doesn't. He says, like a woman wants roses on her table, like to a guy might not get what flowers are, but you do it for your wife, but you'll never really get what that is. Or I have it with Liz. He loves cars, and every time we walk past the car, he goes, oh, look at that Ferrari, and I go, I'm sick of hearing about this Ferrari. Every time, when we live on Bondi Road, every time there's a fancy car, we've got to stop and, but he's a male and he likes it, it's different. I'll never get what the issue is. So this is what Gottman, says now. It's impossible. There are certain things you will never get. But he talks about mind maps. You can, if there's what we would say here, if there's a total view and you're connecting on lots of other levels, you can live with that difference. You can live with it. And we're not talking about big stuff, but we're talking about really understanding, or something will have a different value no matter what. You will just never agree on that. And it's possible to have a really good relationship. But anyway, back to the 70s. Virginia Satir, she wrote this book. And remember, it comes from an analytic background originally. And she says, you have this couple before you that are really struggling. And you ask them, how did you meet? And they say, we were at this party. She says, we were at this party. The woman always jumped in first. We were at this party, and I saw this guy. He was the strong, silent type. And I thought, this is what I need. I'm a little bit insecure to have a strong, silent type. What she didn't know was this guy was riddled with anxiety and totally, fearful, and there was no strength there. He was just sitting on this thing, right? But she projected that on him. And then you say to him, what did you attract? What was attractive to you? And he says, I saw this bubbly girl on the dance floor, and I thought I need a bit of vivaciousness in my life. And she goes, I'm not at all bubbly, but I'm so insecure that I talk too much and whatever. So she says, you're actually on an analytic level attracted on your level of insecurity. That's actually where you fit. You don't realize it, but you have two insecure people who are showing it in a different way. If you can understand that you can actually work through it. But if you want someone to be strong and you're not going to let it go, that's what you were saying. You have the high level and the low level, then you can't work it out. But if you can, people don't work, there are not many therapists who can do this because it's quite deep. But if you can get a couple to see that you actually do match, and you are asking for someone to compensate for you, but if you can own that, introject it, and work on you not being insecure rather than wanting him to fix my insecurity by being strong and her to fix my introversion by being, then you're actually very compatible. You can work on your insecurities. But when it's on the level of you've got to change and you've got to be strong and no, you've got to, then it doesn't work. So it's interesting that often we are attracted to someone who's different because we're wanting them to compensate. That person who's got the lower level might want someone who's got a deeper one because you're missing something, and vice versa. It's a really interesting thing. And that's often when the work needs to be done, because when you are in the beginning, you're feeling that person is compensating and you're not doing the work yourself of owning your deficiency and working on it. But when you're ready to go, I'm actually insecure and I shouldn't need someone to do that for me, and you're both doing it, then you can both grow. So it's interesting you will have that. So it's really important to,